Hey guys, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to another quick tank review. This time we're going to be looking at the Object 704. This is a Tier 9 Soviet tank destroyer with one of the highest alpha damages at Tier 9. If you want to have exceptional frontal armor combined with one of the most devastating guns in the game, then look no further at this beautiful entry in the Soviet tank destroyer tree. I'm going to let you know everything that you need to know about this tank, and if you have no interest in it, then I'll let you know how you can take them out effectively on the battlefield. I have two helpings of gameplay coming up, but firstly, let's just have a rundown of what makes this tank so special. So let's start with the hit points of the tank, which is 1,600, which is a huge step up over the Tier 8 ISU 152. As we can see here, the ISU 152 has significantly less hit points than you would expect at Tier 8 compared to its Tier 7 and Tier 9 and Tier 10 progression. Nevertheless, this is a common feature of all of the Tier 8 tank destroyers. They've got quite low health for the tier that they're placed in, which means that the jump from the 8 to Tier 9 with regards to hit points is massive. So this gives the Object 704 a huge durability increase over the ISU 152, and it can quite often allow you to survive long enough to put in that extra shot, or survive long enough to re-stealth and then reassess your situation. Now the tank weighs just shy of 50 tons, which means that if you can ram medium tanks in this, it's definitely a viable option. Now the top engine on this tank is the same as the one on the ISU 152, so you won't have to research it. Now it's 700 brake horsepower, which considering the 50-ton fully equipped weight of the Object 704, this thing can get around. It may not be as agile as the Foch, but it certainly isn't a T95. Now the top speed limit of this tank is a fairly healthy 37 kilometers an hour, again middle of the road, with a rather less than satisfactory 22 degrees a second traverse speed. This means that if a medium tank or a light tank do manage to get around you, they will be able to do it all day long. So always know where the nearest wall is so you can get your backside to it as quickly as possible if you're outflanked. Now the armor is a huge upgrade over the ISU 152. It's got 120mm at the front, 90 at the side, and 60 at the rear. But as you can see, the front is very well angled indeed. Unlike the ISU 152 where the front is flat and the upper hull is slightly less angled. The ISU 152 is also much taller than the Object 704, which means that when you get into the Tier 9 variety of the Soviet tank destroyer, you can find many more positions which you can hide behind. And this will also affect the camo rating of the vehicle. Let's just take a very quick look into What Tank Viewer to assess the armor in some more detail. So here's our Object 704 with our armor profile and a key at the bottom for you. So let's assess the front of this tank first. We can see the 120mm of very well angled armor here. Now the rate of fire on the Object 704 is slow enough to allow you to angle the tank between shots. So when you're pointing your gun directly at the enemy, obviously you're going to have less overall angling on your armor than if you turn it to the side. When angled like this 120mm of armor is nearly impenetrable apart from the very highest caliber guns. Like the ISU 152, this tank has got a very thick mantlet on it. 160mm of spaced armor there, tearing down to 130 and 100 at the back. If we remove this, we can see there's a very small rectangle behind which there is no armor, and surrounding that is 160mm, tearing down to 130, and then a ring of 100 around that. Interestingly, the center part of the armor here is 170mm thick, which you have absolutely no chance of going through unless you're probably looking down on the tank like this. But you'd have to be an absolute fool to not aim at the area of 120 to the side of it. This area here, which is only 100mm thick, might be an interesting opportunity for you to be able to try and take advantage of if you do have the side of this tank, and you can only see the front of it. Nevertheless, what we really need to know is that you want to try avoid shooting this area of the tank at all costs. But if you are the 704 driver, you can appreciate that this is a rather large area of the front of your tank. Players will often have to aim here. As the gun is not mounted completely in the center, this means that when facing it, to the right of it is the largest area of opportunity. The lower plate on this tank is still 100mm thick and it's fairly well angled, but you will have to be careful of low-profile tanks still penetrating it. So let's look at the side armor of this tank. We can see there's a big glut of spaced armor, which is 30mm thick. If I hide it, behind that is the side of the tank, which is 90mm throughout. We can see that the upper side of the tank is very well angled indeed. as well as the part just below the beak, which is well angled as well, with that 30mm of spaced armor covering it. If you shoot the Object 704 in the side and you hit this part of the tank, it's very likely that it's going to absorb the shot, as you have to get through that 30mm and then get through 100mm of very well angled armor. What this means is that you should avoid shooting this area if at all possible. Hopefully you can put a shot in through the side of the tracks, avoiding the shot getting caught by them and hitting the unangled part of the side, which is 90mm thick. For the Object 704 driver, you can use this to your advantage. Angling the tank about like this will give you the optimal opportunity to bounce from the side. And if you over-angle a bit, you've still got quite thick armor that they're going to have to get through. The rear of the tank is another matter altogether. It is 60mm thick, with an area on top that is 30mm at the back. Just to show you what this looks like, this area might be your ticket to easily penetrating the vehicle if you want to use HE. This 30mm of armor is a godsend for artillery wanting to be able to take out this otherwise very resistant tank from above. So you found out the armor on the Object 704 is absolutely amazing. I might be bold enough to say that it is probably the best on a Tier 9 tank destroyer. A lot of you might be up in arms going, what? Did you forget about the T-95? But in my opinion, the cupolas on the top of it mean that it's easily penetrated from every angle. Whereas the Object 704 completely lacks these weak points. And this is the same for the Foch at Tier 9. The Foch has those weak viewing ports up the top that the Object 704 doesn't. So with fairly okay mobility, excellent armor, you might be surprised to find out that the Object 704 does get a fantastic gun. It uses the same BL-10 that's on the ISU-152, so you won't have to research it. In fact, thinking about it, the Object 704, if you fully research the ISU-152, is going to be one of the easiest tanks to get into in the game. Now this 152mm BL-10 is absolutely monstrous. It fires 3.51 rounds a minute, which is better than quite a few of the Tier 10 tank destroyers. With 286mm of penetration, more than enough to go through any tank in the game frontally, and a fantastic alpha damage of 750, giving it the joint highest Tier 9 alpha damage along with the T-95 and the T-30. Now the accuracy is okay, it's 0.39. Sometimes it will troll you, but sometimes also it will reward you highly. And the aim time is 2.9 seconds. When we compare how the BL-10 performed on the ISU-152, we can see that there's a slight accuracy increase, but probably most noticeably, the aim time has gone from 3.4 seconds to 2.9. Now I had forgot about the alpha damage of using the 150mm on the Waffenträger auf Panzervier, but let's just compare the guns of the Object 704, the Waffenträger auf Panzervier using the 15cm, and the T-95 using the 155mm. Now the rate of fire advantage is in the hands of the Object 704 and the Waffenträger, while the Object 704 outperforms the other two tanks with regards to penetration, and massively so than the Waffenträger auf Panzervier, which basically gets a better performing E100 gun. That penetration means the 150mm is hardly ever used on the Waffenträger auf Panzervier, and it's usually better to use that 128mm Jagdtiger gun. Now the accuracy of all the tanks is fairly similar, but the aim time is worse on the Object 704 than the other vehicles. Nevertheless, if you want raw DPM and the penetration to go with it, then the Object 704 has the best gun on any of the Tier 9 tank destroyers, at least with regards to alpha damage. Of course, tanks such as the Tortoise have insane DPM, along with the Su-122-54, but when it comes to shaving off half the health of the enemy tank, they just can't compete with this Soviet behemoth. So the view range on the Object 704 is 390 meters, and this means that when you combine it with binoculars, that you're very likely to be able to see the vast majority of tanks up until that 445 meters max spotting distance. I personally will probably drop out the ventilation and use a camo net when I get Sixth Sense on my crew. I do feel that you should probably take repairs on the Object 704, and if you want to know more why, then definitely go and check out my tank destroyer crew skill review. But nevertheless, I think that's quite enough theory crafting. Let's get stuck into some gameplay. So here we go. We are playing on El Halluf, and we have a lovely matchup for the Object 704 here. This is the Object 704 completely in its environment. A long range map where the alpha damage of this tank can be put to good use. Now I'm going to run this replay in 4 times speed, because at the beginning, very little happens. But don't get me wrong, this is the kind of gameplay that the Object 704 really likes to develop. You want to wait for the enemy to make the move, so you can shave off half of the health of pretty much any tank on the enemy team. So I blind fire a few shots, hoping to get lucky in the bushes. We won't know about that until the post-game stats. But I feel like nothing's going on that flank, and so I move across to the center. Now I realize that this map has been changed quite a lot in the last patch. But the principles should remain the same for the Object 704. So we've missed about 4 shots. And finally, looks like we might be able to hit something. There's a 50-120. We put one right through the front of his tank, taking off his tracks and removing 771 of his hit points, which was 44% of that Tier 9 heavy tank's health. Now we're watching the replay in regular time, or real time, if you want to call it that. And we're looking for opportunistic fire down on the northwestern flank. So this game has been going on for 5 minutes now, and half of our team are dead, with 4 tanks behind the enemy team. And I couldn't tell if that IS-3 in our base was AFK or not. The T-95 just managed to take out that T-29, and we're on Overwatch. The T-28 tried to retreat from the Tortoise, who managed to bag him on the move. And that Tortoise has just started a hero charge. Nothing quite like a Tortoise for being a big sack HP. Looks like all of the tank destroyers are taking advantage of the rush by our Tier 9 tank destroyers. Holy moly, but we have an opportunity here on the lever. That wasn't very well aimed looking back on it, but we did just manage to bounce 286 millimeters of penetration off the back of a lever, which is quite impressive. Nevertheless, the second one flies true. We managed to pick up the kill on the enemy tank. So a rather unremarkable first 6.5 minutes of the game for me. We've done 1,000 damage, which we've seen, and picked up 1 kill. Now that 50-120 that we put a very large shot into a few minutes ago is flanking around. Probably to try and get this AFK IS-3. Now we made a bit of a comeback there. We picked up a few kills on those tanks, and our T-95 has remained alive to tell the tale. Wow! Not the best luck there, if I'm honest with you. Maybe we hit a very well-angled part of his tank or his gun, and I think at this point I was cursing my luck. Nevertheless, we managed to fire a second shot into him, doing 675 damage. So that Tier 9 heavy tank has been hit twice by us, and that was quite a low roll there. Nevertheless, we have taken him down to 18% of his hit points. And that one flies true, removing all the health from him. So, he didn't manage to hit us once. We weren't giving him the biggest target though. The Object 704 is not a very tall target, especially if you get to hide most of your lower hull armor like I was there. But we've got one new adversary to deal with. A Waffenträger auf Panzer IV, who has picked up 4 kills already. It's going to be a showdown of the Tier 9 tank destroyers. We managed to get the jump on him, putting a large shell through the front of his tank, and I min-rolled 563 damage when the average is 750 is the lowest that I could possibly do. What you see me doing here is angling my armor, and we managed to absorb the shot. And the thing is a Waffenträger auf Panzer is never going to absorb one of my shots unless he gets incredibly lucky and I aim it badly into his tracks. However, if I get to angle my tank in between my shots, like you saw there, we can very easily bounce him. So this 87 is playing really well. He's sticking his gun around the corner, but unfortunately for him, I'm not an idiot and I know where his weak point is. We angle our armor, bounce a shot, turn the gun in, and end his life. So, that turns our game around quite nicely. We managed to hold off that flank, taking out a tier 9 tank destroyer who had had a very good game. And then a very dangerous British tank destroyer, at least dangerous in a brawl. So what you saw there is the armor capabilities of the Object 704. We got penned a couple of times when we had our armor front on. It looks like the Waffenträger auf Panzer managed to put one into our mantlet, which as we were angling like this is quite likely to, well, it's basically hard for him to miss it if he's aiming at the front of your tank. I'd like to highlight that the alpha damage on the Object 704 does give you a large amount of time to angle your armor between your shots. And I guess that's a very optimistic view. I've got a poor rate of fire. Well, a poor rate of fire. This rate of fire is amazing for a tier 9 tank destroyer. It's able to quickly dispatch its opponents. But fair enough, you can't have 750 alpha damage without having a fairly long reload. But I try and look at it as a glass half full kind of way, and thinking that, hey, that gives me more time to angle my armor effectively and use that wonderful 120mm of frontal armor. We blind fire a shot there at the Borsig to hope for luck. And I need to progress quickly here. Now you're starting to get an idea of how fast the Object 704 is. We're able to quickly progress down the slope. However, uphill the engine power can be a little lacking, considering the tank does weigh 50 tons. And this is where you want to be. Goodbye, Tiger. That would kill him in pretty much, I'd say 7 or even 8 times out of 10. 668 damage done to that tier 7 heavy tank. And what you're seeing here is basically that the Object 704 is absolutely fantastic at cleaning up. If I was in an ISU 152, I would have most likely died up on top of the hill. But our armor held true, and especially our hit points gave us that cushion that we needed to be able to take out our opponents. We managed to get the ambush shot on the ISU 152, who was being spotted by our T-28 prototype, and there was nothing that he could do there. Now I load an HE shell. I don't know how much health the Borsig has got left. If I penetrate an HE shell in this tank, it can do, on average, 950 with 90mm penetration, which is more than enough to go through a Borsig. Thankfully for me, it doesn't seem to want to focus on me, and I can go forwards and use the speed of the tank to slam a shot into his turret armor, taking him out of the game and having a fairly successful round there. So I really wanted to highlight a few things with this replay. Firstly, the BL-10 can either be your best friend or your worst enemy, especially at long ranges where the accuracy is sometimes going to miss and make you very unhappy. Also, you should expect the unexpected. Sometimes we bounced off the back of the lever there, even though I didn't really aim the shell very well, and we managed to bounce off the turret armor of a very lightly armored turret, the 5120. I got to show you just how good the armor is on this vehicle, and how the large amount of hit points do allow it to simply just brutalize its opponents. It's not rocket science in the Object 704, it's as simple as penetrate your shot, Angle your armor about like this, hope that they bounce, and put the pressure on them. Especially if you're engaging tanks which you know you can easily penetrate, such as the Waffenträger auf Panzerfahr or maybe a T-30. As you don't really need to try too hard to be able to penetrate those kind of vehicles, it gives you more time to focus on mitigating damage and trying to evade the enemy. Also, we saw that I had a terrible start to this game, doing very little for my team early on. And that's going to happen quite a lot in a tank destroyer such as this. You have to put yourself in a position where you go for those chancy shots, as well as hoping that the enemies are going to push out into the open and you can get the ambush on them. Anyway, let's just take a quick look at the post-game stats. So we spent 29,000 credits on ammunition that game, while the repair of the vehicle was nearly 12,000 credits, giving us a profit still of 21,000. This was a mastery badge in the tank. It was a base experience game of 1,319, and as we can see, we didn't hit any of those blind shots. We got 6,000 damage and 7 kills. Our armor held up pretty well. Our potential damage received was 1,580, but we still had 600 hit points left at the end of the game. We can see here that it is very advisable to shoot HE ammunition at lightly armored tanks, as that one HE penetration on the Borsig took out his gun, commander, gunner, and loader. In hindsight, I probably should have fired an HE shell at the Waffenträger auf Panzerfahr. Nevertheless, we were able to hold a flank very well indeed, and managed to turn a game around that we otherwise would have lost. Anyway, without further ado, let's take a look at some more gameplay. So while previously you got to see me play the Object 704 on a long-range map in a very nice tiered matchup, I wanted to show you the Object 704 on a very close-range map, hence one of the smallest in the game, and not a very nice matchup, really. Not many tier 8s and no tier 7s, as there are some tier 10s on the enemy team. Nevertheless, hopefully we're going to be able to put our Object 704 into good use to pick apart our opponents. So I do not have a very good crew on this tank. I don't have 6th Sense. I moved my crew into the Object 268. So I don't know if I'm going to get spotted. Nevertheless, I've decided that it's probably best to fight down the east here. There seems to be like a bit of a long-range fight developing, and that's something that the Object 704 quite likes. I'm trying to get into a position where I can sneak a shot down the side here. I believe he's in the bush, so I fire out one blind. Those bushes you can get some fantastic camera rating from. Past this building, and if you pull back behind them, you're able to fire through them effectively. Oh no, there's a Waffenträger auf Panzerfahr. Shoot him once! And get out of there. Luckily for us, his first shot did hit a good part of my tank, penetrating, but the second one hit our mantlet. Whoa, that was a thin shot. But it rolled for 777. Oh, that's a lucky number. Lucky that we didn't TK this T125, but I feel like I have to do this to help this guy out right now, otherwise he's just going to be killed by this medium tank. Headshot. 2 good hits into that 1-2-1. Taking 3/4 of the hit points away from a tier 10 medium tank very quickly indeed. Not to mention that good hit that we put into the Waffenträger auf Panzerfahr, doing 780 damage, and he only managed to do 560 to us. I think that IS-8 is being a little aggressive. We put in a good hit into him, but unfortunately for us, our armor didn't hold up there. So we've lost a lot of our hit points, but we've done 3,000 damage. If I was to die now, this would be a pretty good game. Now, I don't want to go around this corner aggressively because there are tank destroyers up here that will be shooting me in the side. So I tried to look for a cheeky shot to put into the Super Pershing there, but we were unable to get through his spaced armor. I'm still very worried about that Waffenträger auf Panzerfahr on the flank, and I let the T110 E5 deal with him. Nevertheless, gonna have a bit of a skill shot here. Oh yes! Right through the wall. Doing 692 damage to the Waffenträger auf Panzerfahr. And you know what? I'd be happy right now if the game was to end. If the game ends, I don't mind. This was a huge round for me. I'm happy with this. 2 kills and 3,700 damage, including a hell of a lot of damage to tier 10 tanks. And that's something that the Object 704 is good for. The BL-10 doesn't care if they're tier 7 or tier 10. It really doesn't. It's still going to absolutely wreck them. Fire through a car, set the IS-8 on fire. He's used his fire extinguisher, but we've managed to do 948 damage to him already. And check out the rate of fire on this tank. If you think it's ridiculously long, then you'll be very pleasantly surprised. If you've played a T-30, you'll know the pains of a very slow reloading 155mm. You don't get that with the 704. You feel like it's ready when it should be ready. Whereas when I play the T-30, I feel I'm always trying to go, come on tank, please put it in quicker. Oh, that was unlucky. I aimed at his lower plate, but the shell went to the right of the tracks. And that's because he shot my track and I was unable to turn the tank more towards him. Luckily for us, he did no damage to us by simply detracking us. Our side armor held up very well there, and we're able to reload and finish him off. And that, I believe, is the last role that we have in the game. Look at this. This is very different to our El Halluf round, hey? El Halluf, we had done nothing in the first 5 minutes of the game. And in this game, we've pulled off nearly 6,000 damage. And our team has won. And there you have it, really. This is why I love the Object 704. There's not a tank destroyer at tier 9 that is quite as well-rounded as this is, and simply able to give an absolute ass-kicking. All of the tier 9 tank destroyers have great guns, there's no doubt about that. But the Object 704 probably has the best gun, in my opinion, combines this with probably the best frontal armor, in my opinion, because of the lack of weak points, and doesn't slack too hard with regards to mobility. And that's why this is a keeper for me, irrelevant of the fact that I also love my ISU 152 and I'm starting to really like my Object 268. Anyway, let's just have a quick look at the post-game stats. So this was a 5-minute mastery badge for us. We picked up 4,052 experience for our double, which is 1,351 experience without a premium account. And that's because all of the damage that we did was to tier 9 and tier 10 tanks. We fired 11 shots, of which 10 hit and 9 of those penetrated. The one that missed was a blind fire, and the non-penetrating shot was that rather poor aim at the Super Pershing, when I was worried about getting one shot by that Waffenträger Panzerfehr from above. Our armor held up pretty well again, 1,510 potential damage received, and I think deja vu, we still had about 600 hit points left at the end of the game. And so there you have it, my Object 704 tank review. Playing the tank in this way has allowed me to achieve 3,200 average damage, which is actually more than in the Waffenträger auf Panzerfehr, albeit by just a little bit. But this tank has been nerfed recently, and the Object 704 hasn't. Nevertheless, I was able to get similar results with the Tortoise at 3,000 damage, but not with the T95 and the T30, as we can see here. I'm about 10% less on average damage in those tanks. And that's probably because the T95 doesn't have the mobility, and in my opinion, the T30 doesn't have the DPM or the hull armor. I guess one of the main things that you guys would be interested in is, which is better, the SU-122-54 or the Object 704? Well, there are going to be situations where I feel that the SU-122-54 is better, i.e. where you can shoot and relocate, hopefully keeping your opponents between 350 meters and 450 meters. Maybe I'm just not a sneaky tank destroyer player, but I really struggled with the SU-122-54, albeit that I realized that I played this before it was buffed recently. I was only able to achieve 2,500 average damage per game in my SU-122-54 and get 56% win ratio. And I feel I played this more recently, where in theory I should be a better player. Well, at least a lot more recently than when I played the Object 704. It's a tank that I've had for a long time, but I really just felt like getting around to doing a tank review on it for you guys now. And that's because, in my opinion, the Object 704 is the best all-round tank destroyer at tier 9 in the game. Now, there are tanks that are better in certain situations. A Waffenträger auf Panzerfehr is better probably when it gets to shoot opponents that can't shoot at it, or if it can be very sneaky. But maybe that was before the camo rating changes. The T-95 is better at hoovering up noobs that like to come at it one by one and don't flank it and don't shoot at its weak points. While the T-30 is better if you manage to go hull down and have very long-winded battles. The Su-122-54 is probably better in situations where you get to shoot and run and use the mobility to outplay your opponents. And there's hardly anything more satisfying than in the Su-122-54 absolutely circle strafing your opponents in a tank destroyer. And that's something you could never do in the Object 704. I guess the Tortoise is better than the Object 704 in pure DPM and hit points. But it's slow and it's got giant weak points on top of its tank. The AMX-54 is kinda similar as well. It has to, in my opinion, fully commit to its opponents because of the fact that it uses 120mm. You don't have very long to try and mitigate damage that you take, and you simply have to hope that they miss. But it undoubtedly is far more mobile than the Object 704 and capable of outflanking people. Nevertheless, I still stand by my point that the Object 704 is probably the most well-rounded tank destroyer at Tier 9, and in my opinion, the best. Or at least the one that matches my playstyle the most. So don't overlook it. The Object 704 is the oldest Tier 9 tank destroyer, and definitely still one of the better ones. Anyway guys, thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it or it was simply useful to you, please do consider liking the video down below. It really helps the channel out. And let me know in the comments what you think about the Object 704, and maybe my claim that I think it's the best Tier 9 tank destroyer in the game. What do you have to say about it? Anyway guys, as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.